turn this over to Nick. He's our MC. And please welcome Mr. Nick Ludwig.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think I need a mic. If I need one, you'll let me know, right? Okay, thanks everybody. You know, it's a sign of a very successful event when more people attend than actually RSVP. I think you should give yourselves a hand. Fortunately, for those of you that thought by not RSVPing that you wouldn't get on some sort of a list, I apologize for that. You're going to be on a list. Most of you, of course, are already on the list. Okay, really quickly, let me tell you the genesis. Take 30 seconds to talk about the genesis of this, because really, Colleen Rowley, 2 weeks ago, we learned that William Bidding was going to be in Chicago, and Colleen said, "Do you think you could get a group if he made a side trip up to Minneapolis or Minnesota?" And of course, we said, "I think we could." And so that was the start of it, and so we hustled and put it together really quickly, and I'm very pleased about this. We also thought that this panel discussion idea would be a great idea. That let's get some discussion going, both from some of our local people asking questions of Mr. Binney and back and forth, as well as questions from you. You'll see on your chairs, right, there should be a place where you can write and ask questions. If you have a question, write it down and then pass it to Heather Johnson. Heather, maybe she's waving. If we have time, we don't know if we'll get to all the questions, but we're going to try. Okay, so if you have a question, you might hear already somebody else ask the same question. So if you got a similar question, it might get asked anyway. But so I want to also thank real quickly again Colleen Rowley and StandUpForTruth.org. Ross, where's Ross?
He's at the bar.
He's at the bar.
No.
There he is.
I was at the bar earlier.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Ross. This is Colleen's husband, Ross. The Libertarian Party of Minnesota Congressional District 5 affiliate, the Blue Republicans, Juliet, I think you already mentioned Libertarian Party of Minnesota, Agorafest 2015. What could that be? If you want to find out more about that, go to the back. The Minnesota Tea Party Alliance, and we also want to thank Bent Creek because I think they were a little bit nervous about this event, and we just want to tell them that look, it's okay. We're not going to be talking about politics here. We're just talking about creepers, peeping toms, people like that. We're trying to figure out whether it's a good thing for America or not. That's all. That's what this event's about. Okay, let's get into this panel. We've got, besides Mr. Binney, we also have our moderator is Tony Stiles. And Tony is from Nebraska, but now you've come up and are you now a Minnesotan?
I have no idea. What does it take to be Minnesotan?
You're there. You're right.
The passive aggressiveness, I guess.
Right,
yeah,
it takes about 40 years to really get it. Todd Pierce, Todd and I go a long ways back. I think Todd is one of the most people with the most integrity that I've ever seen, and seriously, and the work that he's done for the Guantanamo prisoners is incredible. And I know he's going to have a lot of probably pointed things to say tonight, which is great. And then we have Christopher Berg, who's going to represent the hackers, the cryptologists, those kind of people. And I think this will be a great panel. So without further ado, is there anything else we need to talk about? So the bar's down there. The bathrooms are also in that direction. After we're done, we're going to have pizza and more drinking. Tony, take it away.
All right. Hey everybody, I'm Tony Stiles. I'm a radio show host with GCN, nationally syndicated on around 100 stations around the country. And I am here to ask some questions evidently. And I'm going to get right to it. In the words of Bruce Jenner, let's cut the small stuff. All right. Welcome. There we go. First question we have here, and I've written down my own questions. I also have some questions here that were asked from some friends of mine that are here in the room, and also some friends of mine that are around nationally about what we're doing here today. The first question that we had is, how can we push for the FISA courts to be eliminated entirely from the process?
Oh, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
Good question.
Oh, you want me now? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and finish this down there.
This is kind of,
Yeah.
it's, I need a little slack. Yeah, there we go. The first thing I would do is indict them. And the reason I would do that is very simple. They violated the Constitution by issuing general warrants. Closer, okay? How about now? Is it now all right? Can you hear me all right?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? All right. Is it all right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, like I say, the first thing I would do is indict them because they were violating the Constitution. They also know as lawyers and judges that you're not supposed to issue a general warrant. I mean, each warrant is supposed to state the name of the person, the probable cause, what you're going for, where you're going for it, and it's supposed to list everybody. So instead of issuing one warrant to Verizon saying turn over 110 million U.S. citizens' data, well, they should list the names of all of their subscribers and the probable cause why they're after them. I mean, they're after them for law enforcement. That's really what they're after for. And they don't say that, they don't admit that. We're doing all this in secret because they knew it was illegal. Second Circuit said it was illegal. Right, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals just ruled about a week and a half ago that this was illegal. I mean, I knew that from the very beginning. In October of 2001, that's when this started. And it started with AT&T, not Verizon. And AT&T was second in line, and they're about according to the numbering scheme of their orders, there's a maximum of 78 other companies participating in this program, business records transfer. And I would say that one question that Mike Morrell was a former deputy director of CIA. He was being interviewed by somebody about a couple days ago, and he was trying to support the 215, the Patriot Act section that was justifying this bulk acquisition of telephone records. And the interviewer brought up the Love-In program that was done at NSA, Love Intelligence, and at NSA and CIA. They all have direct access to this data too, FBI, CIA, and NSA. The CIA and FBI use of the data is not monitored by Congress or anybody in the courts. There's no oversight of that at all, and there's no record of anybody trying to see what they're doing. So that's being used primarily to convict people for crimes internally in the U.S. But at any rate, he was addressing that. He said, well, the Love-In program wasn't done under the 215 section program, and the interviewer didn't say anything beyond that. Well, the 215 program is about business records, metadata, not content. Well, he was saying they were doing it under content, but the guy interviewing didn't say, well, if it wasn't under that program, what program was it under? He never asked that question. The reason he didn't want, because it would get into the lies that they're trying to perpetuate, that they're not collecting content on everybody in the United States, and that's been a lie since 2001. They've been doing that all along. That's why they had to build Bluffdale. That's why now they have a plan for the next 5 years, in my estimate of when they'll be built. They have a plan for a 2.8 million square foot facility on Fort Meade. And that is almost 3 times the size of Bluffdale. That's because they're planning on Bluffdale being filled in about 5 years. But the only reason we know about that is because anytime they want to do a building like that, they have to submit an impact statement on the environment. And of course, when you watch those, you can pick up what their intentions are. So their plan is that Bluffdale would be full in about 5 years, and then they'll have this new facility that will now handle the continuation of the collection of bulk data, content as well as metadata. I mean, for metadata, if you had a room this size, it could handle all the metadata on every domain, a very possible relationship that anybody can have for everything in the world for about 50 years. You wouldn't need any more space than that, just in this room. Everything else would, the real reason for all that space for storage is for bulk content collection. At any rate, the idea is that we got to get these lying courts out of the way. These secret courts that make secret decisions on what is and what is not constitutional. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's not a decision that you make in a secret court, in secret, in a democracy. That's because right now we don't have one. So that's why I figured they should be indicted.
pass this on down to my right. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
I don't have much to add to what Bill just said. I agree with him about indicting him. I'm going to make a recommendation for a book before we go any further, Lords of Secrecy by Scott Horton. And he really goes into this a lot. One of the things he points out is judges don't get to be in that position by accident, or, you know, they're carefully vetted throughout the process from the very beginning when they're chosen to be a federal judge. They're vetted to be sure that they're going to have the right attitudes on these national security issues. Another book I'd recommend is National Security and Double Government by Michael Glennon, who actually worked for the National Security Council for a number of years. And he argues, and I agree with him, that we have the sort of the Madisonian government that we vote for, and that appears to be the one that's representing us. But then we also have the Trumanites, that he calls them, coming out of the post-World War II National Security Act that created the National Security Agency and the CIA, and that they become such an entrenched bureaucracy within our government on national security issues that they fundamentally have taken over foreign policy, development, and all these other issues that go to maintaining security, supposedly, which includes keeping track of all Americans. And they've got the judges in place that are pretty much going to go along with them because they've already been carefully vetted. So the problem is so deep right now that there's a lot of work to do, and the first step is to become better informed about it. And I think that's one of the things that are lacking in the American people.
One thing I'd like to add is, as William Binney was saying, a lot of the times when the government wants to get information on us, they go to a handful of large corporations, AT&T, Verizon, your ISPs. One of the things that's allowed the FISA court to become so powerful in what they can obtain from us is all of this data is now centralized. There's a handful of large companies that we all have to do business with. For instance, I would guess that most of you here have cell phones, and you're probably on one of the 4 major carriers. So it's easy for FISA just to say, okay, we want to requisition the records from, say, AT&T, and they've got a large portion of the population. So I think part of the thing we need to do as well is move towards decentralizing the system as much as possible. And that would hopefully help remove some of the power of the FISA courts.
Wonderful. I have a follow-up question to ask you, Bill. Can you name, you said 70-some, I think 78 companies that were in the process. Can you name some of those for me?
Like I say, I don't know the specifics of it, but I just made that estimate based on the serialization of the order issued to Verizon in the second quarter of 2013. See, that was order BR 1380. So it was the Business Records 2013 80th order. So that what they're doing is issuing an order to each company independently so that none of the companies know all the other companies participating. So each company gets their own little order. So it started out with AT&T. I'm sure they were the first ones in the pit because they were the first ones participating in October 2001. Then it got Verizon, should be number 2, next biggest one. That's Fairview Program and Stormbrew Program in the upstream collection process. That's those 2 companies. So I figured order number 1, this was the second quarter of 2013. So order 1 and 2 was AT&T Verizon quarter 1. So order 79 and 80 is AT&T Verizon quarter 2, and the others are made up of the numbers in between are all the other companies, maximum, if you assume that all those orders are issued to companies. So you can't have any more than 78 companies participating at that time. That was 2013. There may be more now, but that also includes things like banks, anybody with credit card things, any of the banking systems or any of the credit unions, things like that, anybody with a large population of data and that the NSA wants. Also, some of the internet providers may be in that, in the PRISM program, for example. So it may be a part of that too, but it also probably involves other international or multi-country corporations that cross boundaries, go to Europe and Asia and Africa maybe. So if they have ties in the U.S., we have some claim to legal authority to pull data from them. That's part that's bothering the Germans now, because they, and I've been suggesting to them they should indict the companies that are transferring data out of Germany. It's German. The German European law says that the data about a person is owned by the person, not by the third party holding the data. So in other words, if a third party wants to transfer it to somebody else, they have to ask permission from the person to do it. That's their law. So by transferring their data, and the B&D has also been doing this, it came out recently. So that means that they're violating their own laws, their government's violating their own laws, passing their data on their citizens to the US, to NSA, to incorporate in their database. And the same is true with companies. Well, if they don't want to indict people like the President of the United States or the Director of NSA, then they certainly have the right to indict the companies that are participating in it and also using and getting money from business in Germany. They can certainly do that. I can't tell you exactly who it is, but it's virtually anybody. It also includes people with travel, like airlines, manifests, things like that they want to collect on people traveling. And I'm not sure of all the things they want, but they certainly want any kind of data on anybody so they can build a basic profile of people. And my view is that's to assemble that information so they can have population control, just like they did in the Soviet Union and East Germany. I mean, even now, the Russians are now mimicking what NSA is doing. Their program is called SOAM. I don't know how to pronounce that in Russian, but they're looking at NSA and saying, gee, now we need to do that because they're doing such a better job of monitoring the population. Let us do that too. So we originally learned that technique from the Stasi and the KGB. Now we picked it up and took it in orders of magnitude further. And now they're looking at what we've done and say, gee, we have to keep up with them, so let's go do that. Now the Russians are picking up from us. So it's circulating.
All right, I'm here to challenge. So I'm going to ask down the row here from Todd and Chris if you could name 3 of these companies that you think are involved with this. And then I'm going to go ahead and ask Bill if he could name 3 companies that are actually involved with this.
Any data company, I guess, that handles data transfers. So who is that? AT&T, Verizon, Sprint.
There you go, that's 3.
The whole gamut of them are involved.
If I were going to try and get information on people, I would start with Comcast, as they're a large ISP. Try and get a couple health insurance companies in there. United, I think, is one of the large ones. And I know for a fact AT&T and Verizon have to be in on it.
Bill?
Okay. Well, I can name the companies in PRISM. For example, that's Google and Yahoo and Skype. That's 3, but there's another part of this. You see, there's the front door acquisition of data that they use for PRISM. That is that when NSA comes in and asks them to give them data, what they didn't know, of course, was that their lines between their major data centers was also unilaterally tapped by NSA secretly. So they didn't even know those taps were occurring. That's because NSA didn't want just little bits of data, they wanted everything they had. So that when they transferred data from their data centers one to the other, NSA got it all. So it included foreigners, US citizens, everybody. So the idea is they're collecting all this data. And the reason I said it was population control, because it's all going to be fed into a program called Treasure Map. If you put down NSA Treasure Map as a query in Google, you'll get that and be able to read about it. The objective of Treasure Map is to map the location of every device everywhere in the world, 24 hours a day, every minute of every day, where you are and when you're there. So it's like tracking everybody. Now, I estimate that that's a maximum of 4 billion people. Because there's only about 4 billion people using phones and emails. There's I would estimate about 3 billion who don't have access to those devices. So that means they're tracking everybody that's in the modern world, and first and second world, mostly a lot of them. So third world countries probably less, but the objective is to do that, and do that they need information as well, because the treasure map program gives them the what and or where and when you're there. From the other programs, they get content as well as metadata, so that tells you who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and perhaps even the wham of intentions, of capabilities, things like that. So you get the who, what, why, when, where, wham of everything that you're doing in life.
Awesome. That's scary. Here's another question we have. This is, what are the primary differences in your view between the expired Patriot Act surveillance laws and the just passed U.S. Freedom Act, and what, if anything, will change as a result? And we're going to start from the right this time.
Well, my conversations with Bill Binney over the last year or so, he's pointed out that there's so many different authorities that are used for gathering all this information that, and then I know I've heard this from Bill first, but then just the other day, a law professor whom I respect came out with an article pointing out that even with Section 215 being invalid, there's still all the authority under what the government is claiming is actual authority to continue doing everything that they're doing. And going back to an executive order issued in 1981, which is also the basis for the government saying that we have authority to assassinate American citizens. They use that as that part of that argument, and pretty much giving totally dictatorial powers to the president acting as commander-in-chief. And so they don't really need, a lot of this legislation I think is more for a facade to present these programs as legal, when in fact they're doing them regardless of whether or not there's legislation, statutes permitting it. So I think that's one of the first things people need to become recognizing here is so much of this is done regardless of legality or illegality. These agencies have come to believe that they're the only thing standing between us, or at least that's their claim, and perhaps a nuclear weapon going off in the United States. And so they always frame the argument that we have to balance security against rights, constitutional rights. When in fact I say in meaning, implying that, and of course security outweighs the Bill of Rights and human rights, civil rights. But in fact, I would say they get that the opposite. The whole point about the Bill of Rights, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, pardon me, but the whole point of the Bill of Rights was to provide the largest expanse of minds being applied to a problem, especially in national security. And so we don't want to have a centralized decision-making authority like the Soviet Union did, Nazi Germany did, coming up with great schemes to maybe invade Russia, until you get to Stalingrad, or maybe to go into Afghanistan like the Soviets did in the 1980s until you get destroyed and have your economy broken down. But instead we want to have a wide variety of people coming to these decisions and judging them more wisely than that. Now we've gone the way of the totalitarian states. We've centralized decision making down to a few people such as the head of the CIA, NSA, and a few others who've really become the central planning committee, you could say, for national security and foreign policy. And that's where the real danger begins. And why do they need all this information? Well, again, like Bill has always said, population control. I'll probably get into this a little bit more, but it's really the techniques that you would use as if they were running a counterinsurgency against the American people and the world. Tracking everybody, and part of counterinsurgency is to human mapping. You gather intelligence by whatever means, so that you can basically draw a map connecting everybody to whoever else they may have connections to, so that you can look and say, well, Bill Binney knows Todd Pierce, and Todd Pierce has said something wrong, therefore there must be, conspiracy there, or whatever. And that's the danger. We're adopting totalitarian techniques of population control, and that's the real purpose. We haven't seen it go as far as it can go, but who's to say who will be president, say, in another presidential term from now or two? The whole point of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, was to prevent that sort of situation from even developing, and now we've created the conditions where it's almost inevitable.